Introduce yourself. Again, share an insight and what scares and excites you about AI. There you go.
What is this the one? All right. Hi, I'm Ben Narasin. I run Tenacity Venture Capital. I spun out of NEA, a large venture firm, about 3 years ago. I focus on seed. I've been doing that for about 18 years. Last year, I saw 2,000 companies. I funded 3. They were all generative AI related. It is not because I have an explicit focus on AI. By the way, focused funds have underperformed generalist funds for 40 years. So find that data out there and think about how you invest. It's that the best and brightest always go to the shiniest, most exciting thing, and that is certainly generative AI right now. I paid them personally, the most I've ever paid for a company, $500 million for a company called Hippocratic, which is creating LLM-based nurses. And what's fascinating about AI, I guess, there's so many things, but one, we don't know how it works and how it thinks. These machines are thinking, and people that are in the business will acknowledge they don't actually understand how. 2, it totally changes the value and reality of time. So let's use the example of Hippocratic. They have an LLM that is trained on the nursing notes from major medical facilities. It calls, in audio, every person that leaves a hospital or doctor's office and checks in on them to make sure they are staying in tune with the things they need to do to get better. When in the past would that ever have been possible? 1,000 people leave a hospital in a day. There is zero chance you can afford to get the people to do it. But AI can spend infinite amounts of time and spin up infinite instances, and it will totally change things that we are able to do. I'll make one more example of that. I was listening on calls that the AI made to different patients, and it called a woman that had diabetes, and it did its check-in, and then she said, hey, can I eat beans? Yeah, beans are fine. Can I eat bread? Well, bread's bad, it spikes. And then she listed off, one by one, 56 foods to see if they were okay to eat. And the AI very patiently said, yes, no, yes, no. That would never happen. But not only can the AI allow infinite time to be utilized to do things in parallel, but the people on the other side can take advantage of it in ways they never would have with a traditional nurse in this instance. So I think there are going to be so many things that happen that we are not expecting. I am a little worried about the single purpose tool laborer, the person that is not able to be retrained well because that's not the culture they grew up in. They didn't value education. But hey, I walk down New York City streets today. A lot of people swinging sledgehammers and digging dirt. There'll be plenty of things to be done. It's just if you're that guy or gal in the call center in Bangladesh, woof, I hope you can find something else to do.
Okay, so Maisie. Also introduce yourself and again, what scares, excites, insights.
Hi, my name is Maisie Ng. I'm founder managing partner of Delight Capital. We're a VC headquartered in Singapore. We're now doing our second fund. The first invests in Southeast Asia tech companies that accelerate the UN SDGs. The second fund will invest in AI companies across the AI tech stack. We're really excited by this opportunity because AI is like a techie's dream, right? So because it's so revolutionary, the same old doesn't work anymore. We need a whole new class of semiconductors, data center technologies, new software that will power new applications. So this is, we think, it's like, I think the aircraft guy, this is once in 100 years as well. And what excites me, I think, the sort of paradigm shift that AI brings, it enables us humans to do things we never thought was possible. Initially, for example, when DeepMind was started, it started by trying to play chess, and initially it basically took all the grandmaster strategies and trained the software to play like a grandmaster. And so it played against grandmasters, and they win some and they lose some. And then they decided, okay, fine, we just tell the computer these are the rules, and you just go play. And because computers can basically work really fast, they could play like 1 million games overnight, and very soon they learn how to play. And then they did this Go, which is a far more complex game than chess, and just by playing against itself, they found new strategies that grandmasters would not think of. They'd be like, in a chess game, they'd be sacrificing pieces left, right, and center, and then they win, and people just can't understand how they did that. And a couple of days ago, I read this article about scientists using AI to design basically microwave circuits. And they said that the design that comes out looks really weird. It's not something that an engineer would design because it's not something you've been taught in school. But so it looks really weird. It doesn't look like a circuit board, but apparently it worked better than any other circuit. So I think that is the opportunity that we can have with AI. What scares me a bit to what Zoe said, Someone once said that basically software will eat the world. So guess what? AI will eat the software. And to Ben's point, people will lose jobs. And this is a major paradigm shift. Some of the jobs aren't ever coming back. And so you're going to have like massive layoffs, and what people are going to do? So the consumption will drop because people just don't have jobs, they can't spend. So I think the governments and the companies need to know and try to plan ahead, because the core, I guess, social compact way of capitalism is that if you make money as a capitalist, you're supposed to invest the money to create more jobs, build factories. But what we saw in the past decades is that people who made money from outsourcing globalization, they didn't build more factories, they didn't hire more workers. What did they do? They bought yachts, they bought art. And so all this rent-seeking behavior didn't help the economy, and that is a problem. So if you take AI, that's going to be like compounded 1 trillion times, exponentially. So I think companies need to be aware of that, governments need to be aware of that. It may be that we have to do either tax on robots or UBI, just to what people picking up pitchforks. Yeah.
Okay. I'll let Alex go next.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me. Great to see all of you. I'm going to give you a very short introduction about myself because I haven't met many of you. I'm a founder of an AI company that uses satellites to map the environmental footprint of every farm on the planet to help ensure food security through resilience, but also decarbonize agriculture, which is the second largest emitting sector in the world. I'm also on the side involved in critical mission asset development, primarily energy solutions and data centers, starting with building a digital twin of the electrical grid because it's becoming very hard to connect to it, as many of you know. In terms of an insight that I think hasn't been shared by these experts near me, I think we are underappreciating, or at least I did for a very long time, the way in which industries that have been established as part of humanity's operation for thousands of years will be disrupted. So I work in agriculture. We've been farming in a mechanized or at least structured manner for centuries, but you could argue thousands of years. We are actually, for a variety of climate reasons, but also just the way we've been farming since the 19th century, are on track to erode the size of arable land. It's about the size of Latin America, which puts us in a tricky position, especially with a growing global population, right?
What do you mean by erode?
So the way we've been farming for the past 100 years, is we've been blanketing chemicals nonstop on the soil, mechanically turning it over, same crops. And what we found recently is that process over time kills the soil. Now, the question is, how do you deal with that? One way is to improve how we've been farming before, so precision agriculture, but there's a completely different paradigm on hand, right? So much like a century ago, in order to get a diamond, you would go down a mine shaft. You would dig it up, you would clean it, you process it, you ship it over. Now you can start with a kernel of carbon and grow it, right? Similarly, for example, with meat, we're getting to a point where we can grow real patties that are juicy, feel more or less the same, taste, and are real meat in a lab, without the consumption and the water and the energy needed to raise real animals at scale. So I think it's an opportunity in that AI can provide real resource abundance and a quality of life for each and one of us in terms of volume that is fundamentally different from how we've been approaching it as humanity for hundreds of years. The question comes back to actually something you mentioned and several other panelists, which is how do we tackle the social question and how do we deal with the tension if the gap between the haves and the have-nots increases far greater than we've seen before.
So, thank you, Alex. Somewhat hopeful. Maybe Zoe, you're now on an AI panel. If you stick around, you could be on a health tech panel. What are your thoughts on AI specifically? Scaring, exciting?
I mean, to me, this young man is Exhibit A, why it all is going to be very good. Again, my concern is the transition. And right now, the way we allocate capital to wonderful things like AI is in the traditional paradigm, which is, you know, stocks and bonds go up if X, Y, Z, there's a paradigm. I went and reread, actually, and that's where AI is helpful. There is a book that was written in 1955, and it's basically the structure of scientific revolutions. And it was the first time they talked about paradigm shifts. And in that, they said scientists do a lot of work in a particular paradigm, and then Copernicus says, no, 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 the sun doesn't go around the earth, it's the other way around. That's a paradigm shift. So you do something different. So for me right now, as my 29-year-old son says, technology exists to take the carbon out of the air, to even get these meteorites to go off. The technology exists. How do you deal with the existing capitalist model where you have existing capital allocated to things that will go to zero? So I do believe this is something spectacular and exciting, but I can't put the 2 and 2 together that comes up with 4 in terms of regular transition. And you know, one of the things I said to my son, because the world is now run by octogenarians, never mind heptogenarians, why don't you guys get more involved? I mean, he's a brilliant young man. He studied evolutionary biology. He plays the classical piano. He should get involved. And you know what he said? Talk about socioeconomic issues. What's the point? We have to wait until you guys die off. Now, he didn't mean me, hopefully, but...
So we were in Germany at a round table, and apparently there's legislation afoot to reduce or incentivize you to reduce voting at later ages.
That's a good thing. That's my take on AI.
So you've sort of heard the panel. If you guys want to make some comments, but otherwise I start opening it up.
I would like to comment on something. I very much disagree with Maisie. I don't think the evidence is that people are greedy, venal yacht buyers. I think it's quite the opposite. Spent a lot of time in the trucking space. Trucking is the #1 job in the world by head count. Although nobody wants to do it anymore, and there's an issue with aging out, et cetera, et cetera. But I was very concerned for a long time because I was also looking at autonomous trucks and the massive displacement. #1 job in the world by head count. It should be done by machines. Okay, these people are out of work over time. So I started looking backwards, and one of the great examples, you know what one of the very first commercialized robots was? The card scanner at the gas station. Now, if you're unfortunate enough to live in New Jersey and drive a car, you are in one of 2 states that unions, which, by the way, I could not despise an entity more than I despise unions, so hopefully there are no union leaders here, have insisted that a human being pump your gas. An incredibly inefficient experience that drives me insane whenever I'm forced to deal with it. By the way, yesterday I was in a apartment, we were looking at buying an apartment here, and they have a man who pushes the button in the elevator. Like, talk about, it doesn't matter how much we do, the unions will make sure people have ridiculously stupid jobs and get paid. So anyway, what happened with all that great wealth that was created? Because now they didn't have to employ people to pump the gas in 48 states of the United States. Did people just stick with what they were doing? Absolutely not. They created what is now known as the convenience store. When you go to a gas station, instead of just having gas pumps, which back then was all there was, maybe a counter with gum and candy, full-fledged stores with all kinds of food and drinks and slushies. Those stores ended up employing more people than the gas station attendant jobs represented. Same thing with the ATM. Everybody said, oh my God, all these banks, the tellers ought to work. More banks today than there were with ATMs.
I think Maisie's point was different. Because and Esther again, Esther Dyson asked, what billionaires that you know have become better people in the last 10, 20 years? Some have. But we have a question from
money exaggerates you. It doesn't change you.
Hi, thanks for that. I have actually 3 questions, so you might have to come back to me in a bit. But I'm curious, as an AI founder myself, what industries or new verticals do you feel like are going to be established as a byfactor or a consequence of us getting rid of all of these mundane tasks and grunt work type of jobs?
Sure, happy to. So, the near-term industry that has gone from, I would say, sort of in the shadows, a little bit boring to very exciting, that was obviously energy. So we're realizing that if we're in a race at the international level where we can't afford to lose, the constraint now is to how do we power these machines, both to train the models, but also the humanoids once automation is commercialized, which we're seeing happening very rapidly. That's exciting. How that will be solved, whether it's nuclear, whether it's other sources of energy, is a guessing game, but that's a very exciting space. We haven't seen this growth in infrastructure in decades. Personally, I mentioned an example of how we can, similar to how we can synthesize proteins for medicine, create new foods, right? So there's a company that was able to create cow-free milk, and they tasked an AI to come up with ingredients that would, when combined, taste, smell, and feel like milk. And when, you might wonder what those ingredients were, those were pineapple and strawberries, right? So ingredients that are completely unintuitive to the human mind, that when combined, we're able to synthesize something that we want to consume. And I think we'll see that across food, I think we'll see that across healthcare.
But those are interesting vectors, but I think your question was the
Job
people,
creation.
sort of to your earlier point about people who are going to be out of jobs. Was your question like, where will they be going?
Exactly.
Where should they be? Where's the puck going for people? Is that it?
It's a very difficult question for me to ask, Mark. I would say the best bet would be for the verticals that are growing the fastest.
Or maybe this goes back to Stephen's point about education. Anyone else want to answer that?
You would say that jobs and the skill set would be
I will say.
recycled into something different, maybe more productive, just like the gas.
Well, there's a great example. One of my founders made the point. We brought a YPO group in, and he said, you were talking about farming. Before the Civil War, 90% of the U.S. population farmed. So we have seen a massive wipeout of an entire population of workers. Before, it was all of America. But then they moved to cities. And guess what? When you're on a farm, you cut your own hair. So all kinds of jobs were created that didn't exist when we had a monoculture of farming as the primary job. Hair cutter, barber being one. And there were infinitely more. I think, by the way, if we could answer your question, we wouldn't tell you because we'd be investing in, at least two of us would be investing in it right now to get ahead of it. Yeah, well, you must not have met many VCs because we're very greedy in the first round to get all the ownership we can. That's the only chance we get. But I think it's unpredictable, but I'm not worried that it won't happen. I think look, we have been through this before. The difference is that this is the first time software ever attacked the labor force instead of just process. But the labor force has been attacked many, many times. I mean, the Luddites are obviously the most commonly quoted example. But, it's like labor is like water. It flows to the place it's needed. I do have material concern about, I'll just say, because I'm not going to go too deep and dark here, certain populations that might not have the historic advantage of or desire to reinvest in their own education. And I think that sometimes it's unrealistic for highly educated people to believe that everybody can be re-educated and that they'll even want to be. And so where does that end up going? But here, you want hope? There's 100,000 unfilled jobs in the United States right now in construction that are paying over $100,000. It's a good place to start. There's many places where jobs are unfilled. And lastly, a lot of the AI will augment people's ability and take over jobs that aren't filled, that are wanted and needed. As someone once said, you're not at threat of your job being taken by AI. You're at threat of somebody that's better of using AI taking your job.
I think I might have misunderstood your question. So if you allow me, I'll give you a misunderstood answer. So I think AI could be used also for like robotics. So for example, I think, we have really seen from Boston Dynamics, they're like dancing robots, but that isn't too useful for most of us. You don't buy a dancing robot. But a couple of days ago, I saw this really interesting video. I think it's a US company that has basically built robots that can be used for domestic work. So can you imagine a robot that cleans your house? And this one was cool. So there's like two humanoid robots and standing side by side. And basically the owner comes in and gives them a bag of groceries. And the robots just look at them and they sort it out. And they took up a ketchup and they know it's ketchup, they put it at the top shelf of the fridge. They open it and they see there's eggs and one robot picks up the eggs very gently, hands it to the other robot, who then puts it in the fridge. I mean, that's pretty cool because you need computer vision. You also need an LLM. And you know you can't train a domestic robot for all scenarios, right? So the robot has to know that if it's an egg, you handle carefully, and this may be a quail's egg, so he'll know through the LLM that it's a quail's egg, it's an egg, so I handle it gently as well. So that, I think, would bring tremendous advantage for us, because nobody wants to do housework these days. Yeah.
Can I just piggyback off that for a second?
1 second, piggyback on the mic.
So, as humanoid robots become more and more similar to us, let's say I can build you a robot that would be your perfect husband or partner, right? And it's indistinguishable from the real thing.
I think I can distinguish that.
Today, sure, but maybe 5 years from now, maybe not, right? So my question is, then what is the value in being human?
I think we still have a soul, which I don't think that, we could probably train the robots at some point, but I don't know. It's a tough question to answer. So I think, that's something that we had discussed internally as well. So do we teach robots about, life, afterlife, and so forth? Do we
When you
impart
say
the soul to them?
internally, you mean your fund internally discussed
Yeah,
this?
friends and within the partners, and so what it means to be human, and basically what do we need to teach, the robots and so forth. So I don't know. It's an honest answer. I really don't know. We'll see how it goes.
Can I just, because I'm going to leave after this.
Are you going to
So-
drop the mic and just go?
Yeah. What an amazing question, in the sense that, first of all, the idea that I'm going to have this made in my home, this robot, that I can't control, that somebody else actually can control, I don't know that I'm going to get to that dysfunction. To me, we're not, again, we can take off the table how amazing AI is going to be. Let's take it, you don't need to argue it. It's going to be amazing, okay? The land of plenty. This thing about human beings, my experience at Morgan Stanley was, the ability of human beings to do amazing things if you inspired them is mind-boggling, if you inspired them. That's what humanity is. And so this idea that we're going to replace human beings, you're going to build me the perfect partner, no thank you. What I want to ask, again, of all of us, why is it that we talk in terms of the stakeholder we're talking about is the shareholder of a company that's going to make a lot of money because they're going to fire employees, and therefore productivity is going to go up, and therefore you're going to be rich? That's basically the discussion. Yes. Now, the old capitalist system that I started growing up in as a young, graduate of a business school was you had three stakeholders as a company. Shareholders at the head of the queue, clearly, your employees, and your community. Those were the stakeholders. And I think how we got to the only stakeholder in any kind of for-profit organization is your equity holders, is what stops us from doing inspiring things. I'm not inspired to be richer. They say the shroud has no pockets. So when you're 6 feet under, it doesn't matter whether you're a multi-billionaire or centimillionaire. Did your life make a difference? So with that, I'm going to have to leave.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Just one comment on humanoid robots. Japan has been trying to do humanoid robots for decades. It is not clear that human beings want them. Look, think about your eggs example. So what's better, a humanoid with 2 hands and 2 feet, or an octopod-like creature that has 8? Building for functionality will ultimately, so I'll go back to one thing. You want to know what really scares me? So I was a writer for 10 years. I did a lot of freelance writing. I want to write a science fiction book on the following. Jump forward 10 years. Quantum works, okay? Now, I don't know how many of you spent time looking at quantum. We have no flipping clue what it can do, right? It changes everything. And the only thing we worry about is endpoint security. Well, how about literally everything else? It thinks differently than human beings, find ways to do things that we would never consider. Okay, so now we're 10 years forward. We're at ChatGPT 10. Now, someone expressed some optimism that China and the United States would get together for some positive, oh, hallelujah moment, which, yeah, good luck with that. I'll take 10 to 1 odds against it happening. China wants to replace us, not to be our buddy. So now you take Xi and you take Putin, they, probably two of the richest people on the planet, considering certainly how Putin has raped his country of its capital. And they each put $500 billion in a bucket, and they build out the largest data farm in the world that runs entirely quantum computing, and they bring in all the best people who, by the way, if they don't perform, get a bullet in their head and get buried in the backyard, and they get them to run the newest issues of ChatGPT, and they ask that system, that $1 trillion system, to do just one thing: figure out how to destroy the United States. That's what I worry about. I hope we can stay strong enough that we have a really good chance. And while I'm not a political person, and the pendulum is a nightmare, we will spend well on defense. We will allow AI to flourish. And if we're not a leader, we have a very good chance of being a distant 12th 10 years from now.
And what's your last thought, Alex? Actually, you're going to stick around because you do ag. So the panel you're originally on, you'll stay for, and Rashmi is going to come up along with Chris. And we're at 2. This is why. There's an AI for that. There's not an AI for my glasses. 2:29. So any last questions or thoughts for AI? Yes, sorry. David?
So Alex, I love what you're doing. The thought is, 50 years ago, there's probably people in a room and they were talking about how spectacular we'd gotten at crop farming and the use of these fertilizers and this mechanization, all the stuff that's now proven problematic at that point seemed groundbreaking. What are your views on how we've gone in terms of thinking about the how of technology and being able to mitigate for because everything has trade-offs, everything has unforeseen circumstances. Are we just plowing ahead, same as we did 60, 70 years ago, expecting perfect results when actually we've seen that doesn't often happen?
No, that's a fantastic point. And to give context to that comment, that process, which is the HP process, which allowed us to manufacture these chemicals for farmland very cheaply and scalably, did prevent famines and solved a lot of issues at the time, or post-World War II especially, really pressing. I think today there's a component of that, which is there are problems we can see in the near term, and it's extremely appealing to solve those at the expense of something we'll have to figure out then later down the line. And I will also compound on the comment I've heard earlier. I can't remember who mentioned it, which is that both great powers today, China and America, realize that in particular the AI race is the new nuclear race. And it's a race neither one of them can totally afford to lose, and the importance of which supersedes profits. So you combine that dynamic with where we're today, and I don't see not only any one of us stopping, but how we could even in national interest slow down our progress given the dynamic internationally. Hope that answers your question.
Do you want to hit that or not? Are you good? Well, there's one other thing that I think you all should know. You all know OpenAI, LLMs. Just give 30, 60 seconds on pricing model.
Right, yeah. We are investing in a new company that does the world's first large pricing model. So basically there's a lot of content in the world, but there's no price on it. So this company's figured out a way how to price different content. So just like you train an LLM with text input, with lots of text, so that you can figure out using transformer model what's the probability of the next word, and therefore in doing so be able to form a sentence in reply to a query. So basically LLM has been trained on copious amounts of text to give you an answer when you input a text query. So what these guys have done is, again, they've trained the large pricing model on a huge amount of content, and instead of figuring out a text output, what it does is when then confronted with a content input, it can then spit out the monetary value of that content. And so the use is immense, because right now, imagine if I go to farmer's market, I was sharing this anecdote earlier.
We don't have time for the farmer's market
Okay,
example.
so no farmer's market, so they can price any content.
But the point is, this is another new frontier that I think is, you can talk. We'll be having roundtables very soon. So thank you to this panel. We appreciate it. Alex, stay. Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.